The distillery had been producing the same single malt for 19 years, and in the 9 months since Graham Holt's acquisition team had taken over, they had not been able to replicate it once. The problem was not the equipment. The stills were the same copper pot configuration Halcyon had used since 2004. The problem was not the water source. The same limestone-filtered aquifer, unchanged. The problem was not the grain bill, which had been documented and sourced identically. The problem was in a decision sequence that the current master distiller, a man named Patrick Crane, who had been hired at $210,000 a year and who had consulted for 11 distilleries across 3 continents, could not identify from any documentation that existed in the building. The documentation that would have identified it was in a black composition notebook with a warped cover and the word batch written on the spine in silver paint pen. The notebook was under the kitchen sink of a man named Joel Cassidy in a 2-bedroom apartment on Southeast Belmont Street in Portland, Oregon. Joel was 41 years old. He was a single father. His daughter's name was Juniper. She was 10, and he had been fired from Halcyon Distillery 11 weeks earlier on the same day Graham Holt's restructuring team had eliminated the entire facilities crew. His job title at the time had been Maintenance Technician 2. It had not always been that. Before the notebook went under the sink, it had spent 14 years in the distillery, first in a locked drawer of the head distiller's office, then in a canvas bag on a shelf in the still room, then in the breast pocket of a work apron. Before the work apron, it had been in Joel's hands every working day for a decade, the document from which 11 of Halcyon's recipes had been made, tasted, adjusted, and made again, in batches numbered sequentially in Joel's handwriting from batch 1 to batch 11. Batch 7 was the single malt that Graham Holt's distribution team had leveraged into 3 international contracts worth a combined $50 million over 5 years. Batch 7 was the one Patrick Crane could not replicate. Batch 7 was the one that without the notebook would remain unreplicable, not because the process was mystical, but because the critical decision point was a temperature adjustment at hour 11 of the second distillation run, arrived at through a specific sensory test that Joel had developed over 7 years, and which existed nowhere in the formal documentation. Stay with this, because the man they fired for mopping floors was the reason there was a floor worth walking on. Joel Cassidy lived on Southeast Belmont Street, in a building that had been a dry goods warehouse in a previous life and had been converted in 2001 with just enough architectural ambition to preserve the original brick walls and ceiling beams, and just enough budget compromise to result in windows that didn't quite seal in February and a heating system that produced in the kitchen a background hum that Juniper had named Gerald. Gerald ran from October through April. Juniper considered Gerald a member of the household. The apartment was 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a long counter that Joel used as a workspace, and a living room that had been partially colonized by Juniper's interests, which were currently and simultaneously the complete taxonomy of Pacific Northwest fungi, the logistics of competitive sailing, and a birdhouse construction project that had been ongoing for 4 months and had produced 3 complete birdhouses and 1 structural philosophy about corner joinery. Juniper was 10 years old. She had her father's patience and her mother's precision, 2 traits that in combination produced a child who did not rush things and did not accept imprecision, which meant her birdhouses took 4 months but did not wobble, and her fungi taxonomy had 847 entries and 0 errors. She had 2 things she did every morning before school. The first was to check on Gerald, not diagnostically, just to confirm he was running. The second was to ask her father 1 question, not any question, a specific, considered question that she had apparently decided upon the night before and which she delivered at breakfast with the precision of someone completing a daily practice. That morning, the morning that 11 weeks of separation from the distillery ended, she asked, "If you have a process that works and you change 1 variable, how do you know which variable caused the change in the result?" He poured her orange juice. "You change variables 1 at a time," he said, "and you keep records. What if someone else changes the variables without telling you?" He looked at her. "Then you have to find out what they changed," he said, "which takes longer, and sometimes you can't." She considered this. "That seems like it could cost a lot." "It does," he said. She took a sip of orange juice. She was looking at the birdhouse on the counter, the 4th one, still in progress. The corner joinery she had been refining. She had set it beside Gerald as though the proximity to a reliable heat source was relevant to the glue cure time, which it was, slightly. Joel had not pointed this out. She had figured it out herself. The notebook was under the sink, because Joel had put it there in the first week after the firing. Not to hide it exactly, but because he had needed to put it somewhere that was not on the counter, where he would see it every day, and not in a box, where losing track of it felt like a different kind of loss. Under the sink, between a can of drain cleaner and a box of garbage bags, was a position that was both accessible and not in his sightline. He checked on it occasionally, the way he checked on Gerald, not diagnostically, just to confirm it was there. It was always there. The notebook was composition bound, 7.5 by 9.75 inches, black cover, the kind sold in art supply stores and used by people who want something that will last. Joel had bought it in 2009 at a Powell's Books on Burnside. 14 years, 11 batches. The cover was warped from a spill in 2014. A barrel sample he had been taking had tipped, and the resulting contact with the notebook had left a permanent tide mark along the lower right corner. The tide mark was batch 6 in origin, which was Halcyon's bourbon blend, which had won a regional competition in 2015. Joel had thought, at the time, that there was something appropriate about the recipe being physically incorporated into the document. He had not said this to anyone, because it was not the kind of thing you said to anyone. He had started at Halcyon in 2008 as an assistant distiller, not as a facilities technician, as an assistant distiller, at 24, with a chemistry degree from Oregon State. The head distiller at Halcyon in 2008 was a man named Frank Castillo, 62, who had built the operation from a single copper still in a converted barn in 2003, and who had, in Joel's first week, assigned him to mop the still room every morning before operations began, not because mopping was Joel's job, but because Frank believed that the act of cleaning a space daily made you understand it in a way that operating it did not. Joel had mopped the still room every morning for 6 months. He had also, within the first year, redesigned the temperature monitoring protocol for the secondary distillation and proposed a grain source substitution that reduced input cost by $40,000 annually without affecting flavor profile. In 2011, Joel had become lead distiller. In 2013, when Frank's health had begun to decline, Joel had taken over recipe development entirely. Frank had died in 2017. Leaving Halcyon to his daughter Mara. Mara had hired a general manager named Stu. In 2020, a reorganization reclassified Joel's role to production support specialist. In 2021, a further restructuring had moved Joel to facilities. His badge had changed, his locker had changed, his access to the still room had been technically revoked and then practically maintained because no one else knew how to calibrate the secondary still's temperature monitors. In 2022, Graham Holt had acquired Halcyon Distillery for $8.3 million, describing it in the acquisition press release as an undervalued craft asset with international distribution potential. The contracts were contingent on consistent product. Graham's restructuring team had arrived in September. They had eliminated the facilities crew on a Tuesday in October, with 2 weeks severance and a form letter. Joel had been given his form letter at 9:14 a.m. He had finished his shift. He had mopped the still room one final time because it needed mopping and because the habit was 14 years old and did not stop for a form letter. He had taken his work apron off the hook, removed the notebook from the apron pocket, put on his jacket, and walked out. He had not said anything to anyone about the notebook. He had not been asked. The degradation of Batch 7 announced itself 6 weeks after Joel's termination, during the first production run under Patrick Crane's supervision. Patrick had the formula. It was a 3-page document in Halcyon's production binder: grain bill, water ratios, yeast strain, fermentation temperature, distillation parameters, maturation protocol. It was accurate in all particulars. What it did not contain was the sensory decision at hour 11 of the second distillation run. The first Patrick Crane run produced a spirit that was technically within specification. It was also, to anyone who had tasted Batch 7 with attention, 15 to 20% less of what it was supposed to be, shorter in the finish, less integrated in the mid-palate, with a slightly harsh register in the top notes that the legitimate Batch 7 never carried. The experienced palates on Graham's team noted this. Patrick attributed it to variation in the grain batch. He adjusted the grain source for the second run. The second run was the same. By the fifth run, 6 weeks had become 11 weeks, and Halcyon's international broker had received 2 inquiries from distribution partners asking about consistency and 1 formal request from a German importer for a current product sample before proceeding with contract finalization. Graham Holt had called Patrick Crane directly. Patrick had said the issue appeared to be in an undocumented process element that predated the acquisition and that the previous production team had not recorded. Graham had said, "Find the previous production team." Stu had tracked down the relevant name in 40 minutes. The name was Joel Cassidy. Stu called Joel on a Wednesday afternoon. Joel was at the kitchen counter working on a consulting invoice when the call came in. Stu identified himself. There was a pause on Joel's end that was not unfriendly, but was specific. "The single malt," Joel said. "Yes," Stu said. "How many runs?" 5. Joel said nothing for a moment. "Stu," he said, "I was in facilities." "I know what you were in," Stu said. "I also know what you were doing. They want to talk to you. Graham Holt's team. Will you come in?" Joel looked at the invoice on his counter. He looked at the birdhouse beside Gerald. He looked at the kitchen sink. "I'll think about it," he said. On Friday morning, Juniper asked her daily question. "If something belongs to you but someone else has it, and they didn't know it was yours, is it still yours?" He put her toast on the plate. "In what sense?" he said. "In the sense that you made it," she said. "Like if you built a birdhouse and someone else was living in it. Is it still your birdhouse?" He looked at her. "What made you ask that?" She shrugged. "I was thinking about it." He drove her to school. On the way back, he pulled over on Southeast Hawthorne and called Stu. "Tell them I'll come in Monday," he said. "But I'm not coming in as a former facilities employee. I'm coming in as a consulting distiller. There'll be a rate." The rate Joel quoted was $400 per hour, which was the going rate for experienced craft distillery consulting in the Pacific Northwest, and which Graham Holt's assistant confirmed without negotiation, which told Joel more about the state of the situation than anything Stu had said. He did not bring the notebook on Monday. He brought himself, and the knowledge in himself, and the rate, and his jacket, and said nothing about what was under the kitchen sink. Graham Holt was in Portland for the Monday meeting. He was 44 years old, and looked younger in the way of men who have spent their careers in acquisition and restructuring. He had not known what Joel Cassidy was worth. He had not known Joel Cassidy existed, specifically. Joel arrived at the distillery at 9 a.m. He was wearing a canvas work jacket he had owned for 8 years, and a flannel shirt, and he had not dressed differently from how he dressed for consulting work at the other operations, which was to say he had not dressed for a meeting with a private equity founder. He had dressed for a distillery. At the reception desk, the receptionist asked his name and purpose. He said, "Joel Cassidy, I'm here to consult on the single malt production issue." He was brought to a conference room on the second floor that had been the old barrel storage anteroom and had been converted to a glass-walled meeting space with a view of the distillery floor below. Graham Holt was there, with 2 members of his team and Patrick Crane. Graham looked at Joel with the expression of a man who has been told that a specific person has information he needs and who is trying to reconcile that information with the person in front of him. "Mr. Cassidy," he said. "Mr. Holt," Joel said. He sat down without being invited. He looked at the distillery floor through the glass. Graham said, "We understand you have knowledge of the production process for the single malt that may not have been captured in our documentation." "I have all of the production process for the single malt," Joel said. He said it without emphasis. It was simply accurate. Patrick Crane said, "The documentation we have is complete. We've been following it precisely." "I know," Joel said. "The documentation is complete for what was written down. It's not complete for what wasn't." Patrick said, "What wasn't written down?" "The sensory decision at hour 11 of the second run," Joel said. "The temperature deviation. The specific test to determine when to make it and how far to take it. It's not in the binder because it's a qualitative judgment that developed over 67 production runs and can't be expressed in a 3-line specification. I know what it is. I know how to teach it." Graham said, "Why isn't it in the documentation?" Joel looked at him. "Because no one asked," he said. The room was quiet. Graham said. What would it take to get it into the documentation? Joel said, It would take me running a production batch and walking your team through the decision in real time. That's the only way to transfer it. You can't read it. You have to see it made. Graham said, At your consulting rate. At my consulting rate, Joel said. Graham looked at him for a moment. Then he said, All right, let's schedule it. One more thing, Graham said. Joel stopped. The documentation, the original production records, the recipe development notes. Do you know where those are? Our team couldn't locate a full set in the building. Joel looked at him. I'll look into it, he said. He walked out of the conference room, down the stairs, through the distillery floor, pausing for exactly 4 seconds at the secondary still, looking at the temperature gauge and out through the loading bay. He drove home. He made coffee. He looked at the kitchen sink for a while. Then he called his attorney. The attorney Joel called was a woman named Sandra Park, who practiced IP and commercial law. He told her about the notebook. He told her about the 11 recipes. He told her about the NDAs he had signed in 2008 and 2012 and 2015. He told her about the acquisition and the reclassification and the termination. He told her about the meeting that morning. Sandra said, The NDAs were between you and the prior ownership. Holt didn't inherit the NDAs automatically. They would have needed to include employee agreements in the acquisition documentation or execute new agreements with retained employees. They didn't retain you. They terminated you. Joel was quiet. The notebook, Sandra said. Is it property of Halcyon Distillery, meaning the current ownership, or is it your personal property? I bought it, Joel said, in 2009, with my own money. And the contents? I wrote them, Joel said, by hand, every entry. Here's what I need you to do. Don't bring that notebook to the distillery. Don't tell Graham Holt you have it. Don't tell anyone you have it. Go do the production consulting, document it in a new consulting deliverable under your own name. A pause, and send me a photograph of every page of the notebook by end of day. What are we looking for? Joel said. We're looking for whether what's in that notebook constitutes prior art on a process that may have been bundled into the Holt acquisition as an asset without a clear chain of ownership. Because if it does, Graham Holt didn't buy what he thinks he bought. Or rather, he bought the product, but not the knowledge required to make it. Joel thought about Juniper's question from Friday morning. If you built a birdhouse and someone else was living in it, I'll send the photographs today, he said. He opened the cabinet under the sink. He moved the drain cleaner and the garbage bags. He lifted out the notebook, which was exactly where it had been for 11 weeks, and he set it on the counter, and he photographed every page, all 118 of them. Sandra Park spent 4 days with the photographs. What the acquisition documentation revealed specifically, the asset schedule that had been filed as part of the sale, was that Halcyon's intellectual property had been transferred to Holt Acquisitions as a bundle described as all proprietary recipes, formulations, production processes, and related documentation on file at time of acquisition. On file at time of acquisition. The notebook had not been on file at the time of acquisition. The notebook had been in the pocket of Joel's work apron, which had been hanging on a hook in the facility's break room. Because Joel's official title was Maintenance Technician 2 and the facility's break room was where Maintenance Technician 2s kept their things. The production binder had been on file. The 3-page Batch 7 specification had been on file. The 118 pages of sensory development notes and the specific protocol for the Hour 11 decision had been in a canvas apron pocket. Sandra presented this to the IP specialist. He confirmed that the notebook contained proprietary process knowledge of commercial value that was not transferred in the acquisition asset schedule and for which no separate employment IP assignment could be identified. There was a number that accompanied this analysis. The number was $3.2 million for a perpetual license, or $180,000 per year for an ongoing licensing arrangement, either payable to Joel directly as holder of the process knowledge documentation. Sandra had also prepared, as an alternative, a straightforward employment offer framework, chief distiller, market rate, with IP attribution on the existing recipes corrected in Halcyon's official documentation. She had prepared it because she knew Joel and she suspected that the employment structure might matter to him in a way that the licensing number on its own did not entirely capture. She was right. Joel had listened to the licensing analysis carefully. Then he had said, What does the attribution correction look like? The title reclassification that had moved Joel from lead distiller to production support specialist to maintenance technician 2 over 3 years had not been accidental, and it had not been Stu's idea. A man named Derek Foss, a Portland-based spirits industry consultant, had approached Halcyon in 2019 as a potential investor. Foss had described Joel's informal knowledge hold as a negotiating liability and suggested that reducing Joel's formal title would create a cleaner IP picture for a future transaction. Stu had apparently absorbed and then acted on Foss's analysis independently after the Foss deal fell apart. The formalizing of the documentation, the title reclassification, the reduction of Joel's formal role. The formalizing process had produced the 3-page production binder specification for Batch 7. It had not captured the Hour 11 decision because the person conducting the formalization had spent 3 days interviewing Joel and produced a document that described the process he described rather than the process he performed. The formalization description read, "Adjust still temperature by 3.5 degrees as determined by sensory evaluation of spirit character." This description was accurate in the same way that a recipe that says season to taste is accurate. It conveyed that an adjustment existed. It conveyed nothing about when, how, or what the sensory evaluation consisted of. Joel had reviewed it, noted the inadequacy, and told Stu that the sensory protocol needed to be more specifically documented. Stu had said he'd get Devin back to do a follow-up session. Devin had never come back. And then, 6 months after the formalization, Joel's title had changed from lead distiller to production support specialist. Joel had asked why. Stu had said it was a budget restructuring. Joel had accepted it because Juniper was 8, and the salary reduction had been modest, and leaving was not, at that point, a viable option. He had not known about Foss. He had not known about the conversations. He knew now. The production run happened on the 2nd week of November. 12 days after the Monday meeting, Joel arrived at the distillery at 6 a.m. before the production team and spent 40 minutes walking the still room alone, not inspecting exactly, but reacquainting. Joel adjusted the position of one sensor housing by approximately 2 centimeters, which was not a significant adjustment, and was the kind of thing you noticed only if you had spent years working with a specific piece of equipment. Patrick Crane arrived at 7. He was professional and attentive, and was clearly a skilled distiller working hard to understand what he was missing, which Joel respected. Patrick had, in the weeks since the Monday meeting, run a 6th production attempt on his own. It had been the same as the others. He had stopped trying to explain why, and had started trying to listen. Joel ran the production day the way he had run 2,847 production days before it, methodically, with narration. Not performed narration, not teaching narration. The plain narration of someone who had always talked through what they were doing because talking through it kept the sequence clean. At Hour 11, he stopped. "This is the decision," he said. He was standing at the secondary still, 2 fingers lightly on the housing, not looking at a thermometer. "The temperature is correct on the gauge. The process says we're at the right point. The process is wrong," Patrick said. "How do you know?" "Knows," Joel said. "The spirit coming off right now has a specific character. There's a brightness that hasn't resolved yet. It needs 4 more degrees and another 12 minutes. When the brightness drops and the mid-palate opens, that's when you adjust. The gauge will not tell you this. The clock will not tell you this. You have to know what you're smelling for," Patrick said. "And if you can't smell it yet, then you wait," Joel said. "And you don't touch it until you can." He looked at Patrick. "The 6th run? How far did you let it go before you adjusted?" "I went by the clock," Patrick said. "Hour 11 as documented." "That's sometimes right," Joel said. "On days when the ambient temperature and the grain moisture are both exactly at standard, it's right. On days like today, slightly cool, grain moisture 0.3% above standard, it's 22 minutes early." Patrick wrote this in his notebook. He made the temperature adjustment at Hour 11, 22 minutes, in the presence of Patrick Crane and 2 members of the production team, one of whom was also taking notes. The run completed 8 hours later. Joel drew a sample at the primary testing stage and handed it to Patrick. Patrick tasted it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's it." "Yes," Joel said. "That's exactly it." "Yes," Joel said. He cleaned up his station. He put on his jacket. He looked around the still room one more time, the copper stills, the sensor housing he had adjusted by 2 centimeters, the floor that he had mopped every morning for 3 years, and before that, every morning for 10 years as something else entirely. He drove home. Juniper was at the kitchen table with the 4th birdhouse. The corner joinery question finally resolved, fitting the pieces together with the patience of a person who had waited until she understood the problem completely before attempting the solution. "Did you fix it?" she said, without looking up. "Yes," he said. "How?" "I waited until the right moment," he said. "And then I adjusted." She nodded. She fitted a corner piece into place. It was precise. It didn't wobble. The following morning, Sandra Park presented Graham Holt's attorney with the term sheet. The term sheet had 3 elements. First, a licensing agreement for the proprietary process knowledge documentation for a one-time payment of $3.2 million or an ongoing annual license of $180,000. Second, attribution correction in Halcyon's official recipe documentation, public, crediting Joel Cassidy as author of all 11 recipes. Third, an option for Graham Holt to offer Joel the position of chief distiller at market rate with IP attribution confirmed. He called Joel directly, not through attorneys directly, on the cell phone number that was in Joel's consulting invoice. "The notebook," Graham said. "The original recipes, the development notes, those were always yours." "The final specifications belong to Halcyon," Joel said. "They always did. Those are in the binder. What's in the notebook is the thinking that produced them. That was always mine." Graham was quiet for a moment. "I should have known what I was acquiring," he said. "Yes," Joel said. "You should have." Joel looked at the notebook on the counter. He had taken it out of the cabinet under the sink the day before and set it on the counter, where he could see it. It looked on the counter exactly like what it was, a working document, a record of a decade of decisions, the kind of object that accumulates meaning, not because anyone decided it should, but because things that are used honestly and kept carefully always do. "The attribution," Joel said. "Public, in the documentation. And the licensing payment, not the employment option instead of the licensing, but in addition to it, for the knowledge that existed before this employment began," Graham said. "That's unusual." "The situation is unusual," Joel said. "You bought a company and didn't know what it ran on. That's not a standard gap." A pause. "All right," Graham said. "There's one more thing," Joel said. "Mara Castillo, Frank's daughter. She sold in good faith, and the documentation gap wasn't something she created. Whatever the structure looks like, she's clear." Graham said he understood. Joel hung up. He made coffee. He looked at the notebook. He looked at the birdhouse on the counter, the 4th one, corner joinery resolved, sitting beside Gerald without wobbling. The confrontation with Derek Foss did not happen in a boardroom. It happened in a coffee shop on Northwest 23rd Avenue. Sandra told Joel afterward, sitting in his kitchen with the notebook on the counter between them and coffee on the table, what Foss had said, and what she had said, and what the outcome was. Sandra had put in front of Foss a printed summary of the Foss emails. The emails in which Foss described Joel's informal knowledge hold as a negotiating liability and suggested that reduced to kind of formal title would create a cleaner IP picture for a future transaction. She had not threatened him. She had not made a legal claim. She had simply described with precision what existed in writing and who was reading it. Foss had said very little after that. Joel said, "That was what I needed." She looked at him. "Not a lawsuit," he said. "Just for him to know that someone read the emails, that it didn't go unnoticed." He looked at the notebook on the counter. "Most things that go wrong because no one is paying attention." He was counting on that. And someone was paying attention, Joel said. "Eventually." "The attribution correction," Sandra said. "Graham's attorney confirmed it yesterday. The documentation will be updated. All 11 recipes, your name, public record. The filing goes to the Oregon Secretary of State's office." She paused. "It'll be in the trade press within a week," Joel said. "Frank would have wanted that." "Frank had it right," Sandra said. "He wrote your name on your office door in 2013. It was still there when I walked through last week. No one had taken it down." "It was still there?" he said. "Joel Cassidy, head distiller," she said, painted on the frosted glass panel. The current occupant apparently uses it as a storage room. He looked at the notebook. "I'll keep the room," he said. "They can keep the storage." Sandra laughed, a short, genuine laugh that surprised both of them. Joel accepted the chief distiller offer on a Thursday. That Thursday evening, Juniper asked her daily question. "If you've been the same person the whole time, but people thought you were someone different, are you changed when they finally see you correctly?" He thought about this. "No," he said. "You were always what you were. They just updated their information." She considered this. "So the change is in them?" "Yes," he said. She went back to the birdhouse. The fourth one was done. She was starting the fifth. Joel started as chief distiller on the first Monday of December. He started it the same way he had started every other role he had ever held at Halcyon Distillery, by arriving early and mopping the still room. Not because anyone asked him to, because the habit was 14 years old, and because the act of cleaning a space in the morning. Frank Castillo's lesson, the first thing Frank had ever assigned him, was the right way to begin a production day. Patrick Crane arrived at 7 to find the floor already done, and Joel calibrating a sensor housing. "The sensor housing," Patrick said. "The position adjustment you made for the run. Is that documented?" "It is now," Joel said. He held up a notebook, not the black composition notebook with the warped cover, but a new one, same dimensions, same brand, blank cover, the word Batch 2 written on the spine in silver paint pen. He had bought it the previous Saturday at Powell's Books on Burnside. Patrick looked at it. He looked at the silver paint pen lettering. "The original is under your kitchen sink," Patrick said. Joel looked at him. "How did you know that?" he said. Patrick shrugged. "I've been thinking about where I would have put it. Somewhere close but not visible. Somewhere you wouldn't lose it, but wouldn't have to look at it every day. Somewhere it could wait." Joel looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "The original is on my kitchen counter now. I moved it after the run." "Good," Patrick said, and went back to work. The attribution correction appeared in the Oregon Craft Spirits trade publication 2 weeks into December. Within the first week, Joel had received calls from 2 other Portland craft operations.